Can you really make the Bible say anything you want it to say? I can say that 2 plus 2 is 5. I can swear that every arithmetic book in the world will back me up on it. Every fifth grader in the world can get together and agree with me. Does that mean that arithmetic books can be made to say anything you want them to say? It just means we'd all be wrong. Every preacher in the world could say that the bear in the Bible is Russia. Many have. Does that make them right? Maybe they're all wrong. Apparently they are. So why do they do it? Why do they pump out all the propaganda? Do they really believe it? Is it for the money? Do they have a hidden agenda? We need to dig deeper into the cover-up. It's time to look at the symbols that the prophetic spin doctors claim to be the Antichrist of the 21st century. I'll begin with the little horn of Daniel 7. It also appears on the chart of Daniel. In his dream of chapter 7, Daniel first saw the lion with eagle's wings, representing Babylon, followed by the Medo-Persian bear and the leopard of Alexander's Greece. But Daniel immediately requested information about the fourth beast and the little horn which grew large out of its head. Then I would know the truth of the fourth beast. Daniel was told the fourth beast would be diverse from the others, exceedingly dreadful, with iron teeth, brass nails, and 10 horns. Daniel was also told that it would be the fourth of the great kingdoms of the earth. It would be different from the other kingdoms. It would tread down the whole world and break it in pieces. It would be divided among 10 kings, and another king would arise after them. The fourth kingdom in the line of Daniel's dream was Rome. It was diverse from the others in that it began as a republic before becoming a religious political dictatorship. It ruled virtually the entire civilized world. It was divided by barbarian tribes into the European nations. Another powerful ruler did arise after that division, the little horn, which came up and before whom 3 fell, even of that horn that had eyes, and a mouth that spake very great things, whose look was more stout than his fellows. The little horn would arise after the breakup of the 10 horns. He would arise among them. 3 of the 10 horns would fall before him. He would be stronger than the other horns. He would challenge God and persecute God's people for centuries. He would claim to change the times and laws of God. The little horn did arise shortly after the fall of the pagan Roman Empire and its division by the barbarian tribes. He arose among those kings within the confines of Western Europe. In his rise to power, 3 tribes were defeated. In 533 A.D., the Emperor Justinian issued a decree granting the Bishop of Rome authority over the remains of the Western Roman Empire. In 538 A.D., the defeat of the Ostrogoths and the lifting of the siege of Rome made Justinian's decree effective. In all, 3 of the barbarian tribes, the Ostrogoths, the Visigoths, and the Vandals, had been specific enemies of the Bishop of Rome. His armies were eventually able to defeat and marginalize all 3 of them, to the degree that they were never able to oppose him again. From that point on, the papacy grew more stout than the other kings, politically powerful enough to crown the kings of European nations, and powerful enough to excommunicate kings who disobeyed its authority. In the winter of 1076, Pope Gregory VII excommunicated German King Henry IV, who was obliged to kneel in the snow for several days outside the Pope's winter palace at Canossa before the Pope allowed him forgiveness and the return of his kingdom. That's power, political power. The little horn would speak great words against the Most High. What is referred to here as blasphemy, which is not merely saying nasty things about God, but assuming to oneself the rights or qualities of God. The authoritative Roman Catholic source Prompta Bibliotheca gives us these insights. The Pope is of so great dignity and so exalted that he is not a mere man, but as it were God, and the vicar of God. The Pope is as it were God on earth, sovereign of the faithful of Christ, chief of kings, having plenitude of power, to whom has been entrusted by the omnipotent God direction not only of the earthly, but also of the heavenly kingdom. This is the essence of blasphemy. The little horn would persecute God's people for centuries. During the period of the Dark Ages, untold millions were condemned to death by the Roman Catholic Church for the crime of heresy. Historians place the total at approximately 50 million people, but others as high as 100 million. The little horn would presume to be able to change the times and laws of God. Again, Prompta Bibliotheca gives us insight. The Pope is of so great authority and power that he can modify, explain, or interpret even divine laws. The Bible declares, "The seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God." The Catholic record informs us, Sunday is our mark of authority. The Church is above the Bible, and this transference of Sabbath observance is proof of that fact. And the St. Catherine Church Sentinel says, the most revolutionary change the Church ever did happened in the first century. The holy day, the Sabbath, was changed from Saturday to Sunday. The Bible says, "Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image. Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them, nor serve them." To accommodate their use of graven images, the Roman Catholic Church removed that commandment from the 10 Commandments and divided the 10th commandment into 2 parts to restore the number of commandments to 10. These are the identifying marks of the little horn. The Roman Catholic papacy began its rise to power shortly after the breakup of the pagan Roman Empire. It grew up in Western Europe on the very ashes of that empire. It destroyed 3 kings and their tribes. It was the most powerful ruler in Europe throughout the Middle Ages. It challenged the authority of God by claiming equality with him. It persecuted those who did not follow its religious dogmas. It presumed to change the 2nd and 4th of the biblical 10 Commandments. No other power comes even close to fulfilling these specific requirements. Only the Roman Catholic papal system fulfills them all. It is the only choice, unless, of course, we want to. Then we can fill in the blank with anything we want. But following the evidence, how can we avoid the conclusion that the institution that has claimed dominance over all of Christianity for the last millennium and a half is identified in the Bible itself as God's public enemy number 1? Not the Catholic people, who are for the most part deceived, but the institution itself. Do you begin to see the nature and magnitude of the great cover-up? Now let's look at the little horn of Daniel 8. In this vision, Daniel sees a rough goat with one big horn in his head fly from the west and destroy a ram. He is told that the ram is the kings of Media and Persia, and the rough goat is Greece. Alexander the Great did seem to fly out of the west and destroyed Darius's empire in just 3 successive battles. The prophecy said that when the great horn was strong, it would be broken off. Alexander died at the age of 32, at the height of his strength. His kingdom was eventually divided between 4 of his generals. The prophecy went on to say that a little horn would arise from one of the 4 winds of heaven. The Roman Empire gradually absorbed the pieces of Alexander's empire into itself. In this vision, both the pagan and the papal phases of the Roman Empire are included under one symbol. Just as in Daniel 7, the pagan Roman Empire, its division by the barbarian tribes into the European nations, and the papal horn were all united on one beast symbol. From the perspective of God's people, there was little difference between pagan and papal Rome. When Roman Catholicism became the state religion, pagan practices flooded into the church until it took on the appearance of baptized paganism. The Pope took the title Pontifex Maximus from the imperial Caesars, and the medieval Roman Catholic Empire was built on the ashes of pagan Rome. Thus the little horn of Daniel 8 represents the two forms of Roman paganism combined under one symbol. Like the little horn of Daniel 7, it lasts until the time of the end, when it is destroyed. The little horn of Daniel 8 waxed exceedingly great toward the south, and toward the east, and toward the pleasant land. It took over Alexander's empire. It challenged God's sovereignty by magnifying itself and stamped upon, that is, persecuted many of God's people. It essentially replaced the religious practices of the people of God with its own form of worship, its own sanctuary, and most important, its own priesthood. Comparing the little horn of Daniel 7 and Daniel 8, they are both very powerful, they both magnified themselves, they both challenged God directly, they both persecuted God's people, and they both shared the same time and space in chronological history. There is no doubt that both of these symbols represent the Roman Empire, and both spotlight the period of the Holy Roman Empire and the medieval Roman Catholic Church. There is much more to the story of these two symbols. I have focused on presenting sufficient information to thoroughly establish their basic identification. The more familiar you are with history, the more clearly these symbols stand out in bold relief on the pages of time. The next symbol appears in the book of Revelation. It is the 10-horned beast of chapter 13. We saw how all the symbols in the book of Daniel are interconnected. We need to see how the symbols of Revelation are connected to the symbols in Daniel. That connection is made through the 10-horned beast of Revelation chapter 13. The book of Daniel is unique to the Old Testament. There is no other book like it. Likewise, the book of Revelation is unique to the New Testament. But they are both very similar to each other. They both use a great deal of symbolism. They both have detailed chronological prophetic timelines. They both have a balance between historic and prophetic information. The book of Daniel has 12 chapters, the book of Revelation 22. Chapter 7 is roughly the center of the book of Daniel. Chapter 13 is roughly the center of the book of Revelation. Daniel 7 is a dream containing a lion, a bear, a leopard, and a beast with 10 horns. The beast of Revelation 13 has the body of a leopard, the feet of a bear, the mouth of a lion, and it also has 10 horns. Nowhere else in the Bible do these symbols appear together. Is this a coincidence? Hardly. These two books are joined at their very centers by interlocking symbolism. These two visions are intrinsically connected, but there are additional qualifying details. In Revelation 13, the details are mentioned in reverse order. That is because the time reference has changed. Daniel's vision looks forward from the beginning of the timeline. The time of the beast of Revelation 13 is looking backward across the same historic time period. The crowns on the 10 horns indicate that this beast is active during the period of the European kings. And the little horn of Daniel 7 and the beast of Revelation 13 both act the same way. They both blaspheme God. They both make war with God's people. They both overcome God's people, and they are both in full power during the same time period. We need to look at that time period because it appears in different forms. Daniel's calendar was a lunar calendar, which uses 12 30-day months and makes up a few extra days at the end of the year. Using the lunar calendar, 3.5 years would be equal to 42 months, or 1,260 days. In prophetic time, a day is often used to represent a year. In Daniel and the Revelation, this time period appears 7 times, given 3 times in years, twice in months, and twice in days. All of them refer to the extended period of persecution of God's people under the little horns of Daniel and the 10-horned beast of Revelation. There is another interesting detail regarding this 10-horned beast symbol of the papacy in Revelation 13. The last verse of the chapter says, "Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. This is the infamous 666. It is the number of the beast and the number of a man. Since 1912, the Catholic Church in America has published a weekly newspaper entitled Our Sunday Visitor. On April 18, 1915, this interesting explanation appeared. It said, "The letters inscribed in the Pope's mitre are these: Vicarius Filii Dei, which is Latin for the Vicar of the Son of God." Roman Catholic sources have since tried to declare that the papacy has never used this term as an official title and that it never appears in any of their authoritative documents. But the term does indeed appear in such places. I refer to Our Sunday Visitor because the photocopy is available and the description is extremely descriptive. Notice that it goes on to say, "Catholics hold that the Church, which is a visible society, must have a visible head. Christ, before his ascension into heaven, appointed St. Peter to act as his representative. Upon the death of Peter, the man who succeeded to the office of Peter as Bishop of Rome was recognized as the head of the Church. Hence, to the Bishop of Rome, as head of the Church, was given the title Vicar of Christ." Why would Roman Catholics be so anxious to distance themselves from this title for the Pope now? Vicarius Filii Dei is a Latin term, the language of Rome. Roman numerals are still very familiar to most everyone. When you place Roman numerals next to the letters that have a numerical designation in Latin, you get this. Catholic writers have gone to great lengths to deny this, saying that anyone's name can be twisted to get 666 in some manner. Not so. They must resort to very complicated formulas and transcriptions to arrive at any of the possibilities they suggest. But the number of the beast is quite simple. Roman letters, Roman numbers, pointing to the head of a Roman church. The number of a beast and the number of a man, 666. Why so many symbols for the papacy? There is a lot more information coded into each of these visions and symbols than I am able to cover here. Each symbol provides unique insights into the realities they represent, and as they move farther along the historical timeline, they tend to become more descriptive in their details. Just as the 4 visions of the kingdoms linked together forge an unbreakable identification of the historical progression, so the 6 great symbols of the papacy link together to form a complete picture of this tyrannical power, whose head is represented as a man. He wears a triple crown known as the tiara, to humbly represent his priestly power to forgive sins as judge, teacher, and king over the church, with temporal power over all civil rulers of the earth. Somewhat less modestly, the Catholic source prompted Bibliotheca tells us, the Pope is crowned with a triple crown, as King of heaven, and of earth, and of the lower regions. How many other men in the history of the world have you ever heard claim to be the King of heaven, and of earth, and of the lower regions, and have millions of people buy it? 6 Bible symbols pointing to the papacy. 3 crowns that proclaim the Pope's supremacy over the entire universe. 666. Is this coincidence? Hardly. It's all part of the intricately woven tapestry of history. It is why there are so many symbols and so many details. The odds of the details of Daniel alone being fulfilled precisely over 2,600 years is better than 1,000,000,000 to 1. Add in the details of the book of Revelation, and those odds increase to 1,000,000,000 to 1. But here is a footnote to the papal tiara. Pope Paul VI was the last pope to be coronated with a tiara in 1963. He wore his a few times, then in a dramatic gesture of humility, he laid it on the altar of St. Peter's Basilica, and no pope has worn one since. Notice the humble headgear he wore in its place. Does anyone see the irony in all of this? Well, how about this? It was announced that the tiara would be sold and the proceeds given to charity. However, it was purchased by the Catholic Church in the United States instead, and now this token of humility is enshrined in all its glory in the Basilica of the National Shrine of the Immaculate Conception in Washington, D.C. So much for charity.